However, your MAV does not mean that you are training as hard as you possibly can. And in fact, you will probably hit a peak before you even max out your efforts and are training as hard as possible. So when you're doing progressive overload and trying to train harder and harder and max out your efforts, you're going to see a fall off in your strength and performance before you actually do max out and hit what is called your maximum recoverable volume. All right, so knowing this, you might be thinking, should you even train harder than your maximum adaptive volume and do your maximum recoverable volume? And that is a good question. All right, so let's talk about your maximum recoverable volume for your MRV, which is the most amount of work that your body can possibly recover from. All right, so much that it is actually starting to cause diminishing returns and a reduction of hypertrophy adaptations. Now, this does not mean muscle loss, but just less growth than what you were experiencing before at your MAV. Understand? And this is an extremely high volume, especially for intermediates and advanced people, and is very hard to get to because at that point you're going to be very concerned about how you're going to possibly do that much work in a week. All right, how are you going to divide it all up in your workout splits so that you're not doing too much per session volume? And for advanced athletes, this will oftentimes mean doing multiple sessions per day because it would be just too much to do in one session per day. So your maximum recoverable volume is very high, higher than you may think. All right, and it's extremely high for advanced athletes and even for intermediate athletes with large muscles such as the back. It is very high. All right, so for instance, think about doing 5 sets of back 5 days a week. Yeah, and you still have to work out everything else at a high volume too. So this is why I say that it is so much to do that advanced athletes will have to do multiple training sessions per day. All right, it's almost an overwhelming amount to do, and pushing it too far and doing your MRV for too long or pushing it to the higher limits of your MRV can and will often cause injury, which then causes you to get detrained and lose muscle. All right, so even though earlier I said that, this is not the amount of volume that will cause muscle loss, but just a, lesser growth stimulus, well, it will certainly cause muscle loss if you do it too much and then injure yourself and can't even train at all. All right, so be sure to keep that in mind. All right, so you're probably wondering, why even do the MRV? And that's a good question. Well, the main reason that I can see for doing MRV is to build work capacity so that you can do more work in the future. So this is very good for beginners to do who will have a much lower MRV than intermediates and advanced, especially beginners who are young and can recover very well and thus can handle higher volume training, right? And it's also good for intermediate and advanced trainees to do just at the very end of your blocks of progressive overload, just for a week to push your limits and really stimulate your muscles to the max, and also again increase work capacity so that you can do more work in the future if you need to. And it's safe to do it that way. Okay, it's safe to do your MRV a little here and there for just a week or so at a time, but you just have to be careful and not do it for too long at any one time or be doing too much of it. All right, stay with the very low end of your MRV. All right, because going too far past the line of your MRV is overtraining and will cause injury, at least for most people. All right, because the younger you are and the better your health, the more you can handle it. Also, the better you are able to recover, the more you can handle it, right? So this is why advanced professional athletes may be able to be at their MRV for longer because they are doing this as their day job, right? So recovery is part of their job, right? So they can dedicate a whole part of their day to training and then a whole nother part to recovery. Also, advanced athletes who are professionals will periodize their training. And that's one of the reasons why if you want to be a professional athlete or training at an advanced level, that advanced concepts such as periodization and your training split and recovery are very important. So now, just as how your MEV is not to be confused with your MV, you don't want to confuse your MAV with your MRV, because while there may be a kind of blurry line between them, it is a line that defines training a lot and hard so that you are peaking your performance and overtraining. So remember that your maximum adaptive volume is training with peak performance at the maximum volume you can adapt and grow from, whereas your maximum recoverable volume is more than this and is the most volume that you can safely recover from. So when you're doing progressive overload and going into very high volume training, once you get past your MAV and into your MRV, you will start to be giving your body too much to adapt from it. And at that point, your body is mainly concerned with even recovering at all. And if you add any more volume, it won't be able to. And you'll start to do more harm than good and cause injuries. So while I said that it is okay to do your MRV for 1 week at the very end of your progressive overload, the only reason you should get to it is when you are going to have a week of deloading and rest afterwards, so that your body will have extra time and energy to focus on recovery. And then hopefully when you've recovered from it, if you've focused on your recovery enough, your work capacity and strength will have gone up, so that you can do even more progressive overload in the future. But you have to be careful, and the tricky and risky part about going from your MAV to your MRV and the concept of overtraining is that the chances are that the line between training as hard as possible and overtraining is lower than you think it might be. Alright, so you're more apt to overtrain and hurt yourself than you probably think you are. And that's why you need to approach this line with extreme caution and make sure you aren't doing too much and are also focused on recovery, because remember, that is when muscle actually grows. So most people think that the harder you train, the more you gain, but that is not true. It is true when you're going from your MV or MEV to your MAV, alright? But the line of the MAV and MRV, at which point you are no longer growing, are closer than you think and very easy to cross. Especially because your body won't tell you when you're doing more harm than good until it's too late. So what you'll find is that you actually get more growth with less, rather than training as hard as you possibly can, doing as much of a workload as you possibly can. Actually using less weight and lower volume with greater focus on good technique will produce greater results for most people, except for advanced athletes and people who really need that high volume or weight. Because training as hard as you possibly can is actually overtraining, which just kills your gains and damages the body, and over a short period of time will produce injury that will put you out of commission. So make sure you avoid doing it, and watch out for your MAV when you are starting to peak and going into your MRV where you're starting to see that performance fall off. Alright, and at that point, don't just keep on putting weight on the bar and adding sets to your routine in spite of your loss of strength and surmounting fatigue, because the law of diminishing returns is in effect. You do not want that peak to turn into a plateau, or worse, a fall off.